The voice cracked through warm morning air like a whip. "Step out of the car. Now!" Sergeant Harlan Beck's tone carried no courtesy. It was a threat sharpened by resentment. Behind him, the red and blue lights pulsed against the black Tesla Model S as it rolled to a stop on the highway. Sunlight flashed across the polished hood and danced over Damian Cross's windshield. He checked the rearview mirror. No violation. No reason. In that instant, he understood this had nothing to do with traffic. It was about him. Beck's partner, Officer Lena Holt, slammed her door hard enough to shake the asphalt. She gripped her baton like a weapon and circled the car, tapping the rear glass. "Trunk open, sir. Now." Her voice held that false politeness that so often came just before cruelty. Damian kept both hands visible on the steering wheel, calm but alert. "Officer," he said evenly, "is there a legal reason for this stop?" The baton struck the car again. Beck leaned in through the driver's window, his breath sour with stale coffee. "Left taillights out. That's reason enough." Damian Cross was a man who understood both law and silence. He had spent years in courtrooms teaching juries the difference between evidence and assumption. Nothing in his federal training had prepared him for the moment a knee pressed against his neck under the bright sun. Beck's radio crackled. A short burst of static carried a few words Damian caught through the open door. A bet. His stop was worth money to someone. That was all it took to turn a federal officer into a prize. He slipped his phone into his vest pocket and started recording. Holt ordered him out again, louder this time, her voice tight with adrenaline. "Out of the car. Hands where I can see them." She yanked the door open before he could move. The seatbelt caught across his chest as she dragged him halfway out. Beck shouted about resisting arrest from behind. Damian never resisted. He never even raised his voice, but they needed resistance to justify what came next. The ground was cool from the night, yet the metal of Holt's knee burned against his neck as she pinned him down. Gravel scraped his cheek. The ordeal stretched on under the glaring sun. Those long, humiliating moments of silence and the sound of his own breath fighting for space while the officers laughed over the open channel. When they finally hauled him up, blood streaked down the side of his face from a scrape at the temple. Beck avoided his eyes. Holt looked away completely, as if afraid of what she had done. The cuffs clicked tight, too tight, the sting traveling up his arms. "What's the charge?" Damian asked, voice steady. Beck smirked. "We'll think of something." The ride to the precinct was brief. The back seat reeked of old sweat and disinfectant through the metal grate. Damian watched the city roll by. Clean sidewalks, joggers, sunlight flashing across glass towers. The same city that had once printed posters about reform, equality, and accountability. He had helped draft some of those reforms himself. Now he was the test subject for how much they really meant. Inside the precinct, the hallways smelled of burnt coffee and copier toner. The fluorescent lights hummed. The camera above the booking desk blinked red for a second, then went dark. "Systems down again," someone muttered. Beck wrote something on a clipboard and handed it off without looking. "Hold him in 4B, resisting and assaulting an officer." The clerk did not question it. No one did. The holding cell was small, concrete painted beige, with a metal bench bolted to the wall. A single narrow window let in a blade of sunlight that cut across Damien's face. He counted his breaths and tried to steady his pulse. His watch was gone. His tie had been cut during the search. His throat hurt when he swallowed. Somewhere down the hall, an officer laughed, a low, cruel sound that made the silence heavier. He thought of his wife, Lila. She used to drive this same stretch of highway before she disappeared years earlier. Her case was still open, but everyone had stopped talking about it after a while. The file had gone quiet, like a door sealed shut. He used to believe she was somewhere safe, but every time he saw a police badge now, that hope cracked a little more. Outside, the sun climbed higher. On any other morning, he would have been preparing arguments for court or reviewing files. Today, his only file was the charge sheet on a desk outside the cell, a sheet that turned a prosecutor into a criminal. Beck stood on the other side of the glass, arms crossed, watching him. "You think you're better than us, huh? We all bleed the same." Damien met his gaze and answered quietly. "Some of us bleed for truth." It was not a threat. It was a statement of fact. Beck flinched anyway, as if the words carried more weight than any weapon. Minutes later, Holt appeared with a clipboard. Her hands shook slightly as she wrote. Beck barked at her. "Make it stick, Lena. We're not losing this one." She nodded, but did not look up. When she turned to leave, the sleeve of her uniform brushed the bars, leaving a faint streak of chalky dust on the steel. Damien noticed the small tremors in her hand. Maybe guilt, maybe fear of something larger than either of them. Then came the quiet, the kind that fills every corner of a man's thoughts when he realizes justice has left the room. Damien leaned back against the wall and let his mind replay those moments on the roadside. He was not angry yet. He was calculating. Every injustice leaves a pattern, and he had spent his life learning how to read them. Somewhere above, the building's air vent rattled. He listened to it like a steady, mechanical heartbeat. In another office, someone would type a report, falsify a log, maybe delete a camera file. It was routine. That was what made it dangerous. the casual way corruption disguised itself as paperwork. That morning, Naomi Reyes arrived at the precinct's front desk. Her badge caught the light as she introduced herself. Assistant District Attorney, heavily pregnant, steady, and unafraid. She asked for access to her client. The desk sergeant, chewing gum, shook his head. "He's being processed. Come back later." Naomi's tone did not waver. "He's not a suspect. He's a federal prosecutor. I want him released now." The officer shrugged and tapped at the keyboard without typing. "Come back after lunch. Maybe then." She stared at him for a long moment, then turned away. She had seen this wall before, the one built of procedure and arrogance, tall enough to hide misconduct. She called upstairs, but no one answered. Down in the basement, Sonny Bennett pushed a yellow mop bucket through the hall. Her fake badge read, "Maintenance Assistant." The air was thick with the scent of bleach and hot metal. She had been coming here regularly for several weeks under a contract cleaning crew. No one noticed her. That was the point. Her small camera hung around her neck like an ID tag. Sonny paused near the steel bin marked "Confidential Burn." It was almost full. Crumpled papers, envelopes, even a few film canisters. She glanced around. No one was watching. In one smooth motion, she opened the lid, slipped on gloves, and began sorting. Her heart thudded as she found a stack of Polaroids clipped together. Officers laughing beside stacks of cash, beer cans on a poker table. Beneath them lay an invoice from Axon Security Solutions, signed by Sergeant Harlan Beck. Sonny frowned. Axon supplied surveillance equipment to the precinct. Why was cash flowing to a personal account? She slid the papers into a trash bag and kept going. Then she found the jackpot, a torn notebook page headed "Blue Bet." She froze. That name had surfaced before, whispered in police bars, rumored to be an underground game where officers gambled on who they stopped, who they humiliated, who they could make kneel. Her hands trembled as she taped the page back together. Piece by piece, the entries appeared. One line read, "Cross Tesla, $750. The same morning, the same car. It was not random. It was a hit. She tucked the evidence under her cleaning rag and kept moving as footsteps echoed behind her. "Hey, Sunshine," an officer called, smirking at her nickname. "You missed a spot." She forced a smile and rolled the mop away, heartbeat pounding like a drum. Upstairs, Damien sat behind glass in the holding room. His wrists ached from the cuffs, but his mind was clear. He replayed every detail, their voices, the radio code. He knew how evidence vanished here. He had seen cases collapse under convenient malfunctions. This was no accident. They wanted him humiliated, discredited. It was all part of the game. He leaned forward and whispered to himself, "That's all I'll need." Detective Julian Soto entered the observation booth across the hall. He had once been friends with Beck before gambling debts and power ruined that friendship. Soto had seen too much and said too little. Something about this case felt wrong. He logged into the precinct server and navigated to the body cam archive. The file from the morning stop was flagged as corrupted. He checked the network log. A deletion request had come from an internal IP, Beck's workstation, shortly after the arrest. Soto copied the original cache to a personal drive before it could vanish. He did not know it yet, but that single act would help save a man's life. Meanwhile, Sunny slipped into the employee lounge. The fluorescent lights buzzed overhead. She pulled out her camera, loaded fresh film, and began photographing everything. Every page, every receipt, every scrap of handwriting. She had learned these old-school methods from her sister, Lila, who had vanished years earlier while investigating misconduct at the port. That disappearance still haunted Sunny's dreams. Every flash of the camera now felt like an act of defiance, a promise whispered to her lost sister. "I'll find them. I'll finish what you started." Back in the cell, Damien noticed a faint hum from the vent above. Soft footsteps approached. A knock came at the door. "Lunch," a female voice said, cautious. The slot opened, and a brown paper bag slid through. Inside were an apple, a sandwich, and a small folded note. He unfolded it under the table. "They planned it before you left home. No signature, but the handwriting was careful and familiar." He did not know who had sent it, only that someone out there was watching and knew the truth. Sunny finished her shift, turned in her badge, and stepped into the daylight outside the precinct. She stopped at a mailbox near the station, dropped a thick brown envelope inside, and whispered, "Run fast." Inside were the photographs, the invoice, and the blue bet note, addressed to an anonymous post office box registered to D. Cross. Hours later, Damien's name hit the local booking log. Within minutes, the whispers started. A federal prosecutor under arrest for assaulting an officer. The courthouse buzzed with disbelief. Naomi called her supervisor, who confirmed there was no warrant, no probable cause. She demanded entry again and was met with silence. The wall was tightening. Soto returned to his desk, head spinning. He had printed the cache log and slipped it under his vest. Beck was leaning against the vending machine nearby, laughing with Holt. "Easy morning, huh?" Beck said, tossing a coin. "Man got mouthy. We shut it." Holt did not laugh. Her face was pale, her voice distant. "He wasn't fighting, Harlan. You know that." Beck's grin faded. "We play the game. We stick to the rules. Don't start feeling sorry now." He walked off, leaving her staring at her reflection in the vending glass. She saw herself not as a cop, but as a mother who might one day have to explain this to her son. That night, as the precinct quieted, Sunny sat in her small apartment, surrounded by negatives and tape. The walls were covered with pinned photographs, maps, receipts, and timestamps, all linked by red thread. At the center sat a single Polaroid of Lila, smiling beside a ship container marked with a port number. Sunny whispered to it, "Your story isn't over yet." She began piecing together the notebook she had salvaged. Page by page, she recreated the Blue Bet ledger. The total stunned her. More than $1 million in wagers across dozens of officers spanning several years. Every entry tied to a victim's name, race, and time of stop. This was not just corruption. It was a sport. Soto opened his laptop at home and transferred the footage to an encrypted drive. The video showed everything. The stop, the false command, the pressure on Damien's neck, the timer marking the length of the incident. He stared at it, jaw tight. He had seen plenty of bad arrests, but this one carried a different weight. He shut the lid, reached for his phone, and typed a single message. "We need to talk." Early the next morning, the envelope from Sunny arrived at a federal post office box downtown. A clerk stamped it, received without question. Inside the cell at the precinct, Damien opened his eyes to another shaft of sunlight slicing through the bars. The bruises on his neck had darkened overnight, but his resolve was solid. He knew someone had just handed him the first crack in the system's armor. He leaned forward and whispered to himself, "You made a bet, Beck, but I've spent my life prosecuting gamblers." Outside, the city kept moving. Coffee shops opening, buses rumbling, sunlight glinting off glass towers. No one knew yet that inside an old steel bin marked "Confidential Burn," the evidence that would bring down one of the city's most corrupt precincts, had already been rescued by a woman named Sunny, who refused to let the truth die in the dark. The morning had sharpened into full daylight when Naomi Reyes arrived at the precinct again. Her coat brushed against her belly as she moved, heavily pregnant and still refusing to slow down. She flashed her badge. "I'm here to see Damien Cross." The officer at the desk looked up from his coffee, unbothered. "Not possible, ma'am. He's still under questioning." Naomi's tone did not waver. "He's not a suspect. He's a federal prosecutor. I want him released now." The officer shrugged. "Come back after lunch. Maybe then." She stared at him for 3 long seconds, then turned away. She had seen this wall before. She called upstairs, but no one answered. Down in the basement, Sunny Bennett pushed her yellow mop bucket through the hall. She had been coming here regularly for several weeks. No one noticed her. That was the point. Sunny paused near the steel bin marked "Confidential Burn." She glanced around, then opened the lid and began sorting. Her heart thudded as she found the stack of Polaroids, officers laughing beside stacks of cash. Beneath them lay the Axon invoice signed by Beck. She slid the papers into a trash bag and kept going. Then she found the torn notebook page headed "Blue Bet." She froze. That name had appeared before. She taped the page back together. One line read, "Cross Tesla, $750. The same morning, the same car." It was not random. It was a hit. She tucked the evidence under her rag and kept moving as footsteps echoed behind her. Upstairs, Damien sat behind glass in the holding room, replaying every detail. He knew how evidence vanished here. This was no accident. Detective Julian Soto bypassed the deletion lock on the body cam file and found the hidden data log. The footage played normally until Beck's shout of "Stop resisting," and then the feed went black. Soto checked the network activity and saw the deletion request sent from Beck's terminal shortly after the arrest. He backed up the full cache and whispered, "Got you." Sunny slipped into the employee lounge and began photographing every page and receipt. She had learned these methods from her sister, Lila, who had vanished years earlier while investigating misconduct at the port. Every flash felt like defiance, a promise to her lost sister. Back in the cell, a cautious female voice brought lunch through the slot. Inside the bag was a small folded note. "They planned it before you left home." Sunny finished her shift and dropped a thick envelope into a mailbox near the station, whispering, "Run fast." Inside were the photographs, the invoice, and the blue bet note addressed to Damien Cross's post office box. Hours later, his name hit the booking log. Whispers spread through the courthouse. A federal prosecutor arrested for assaulting an officer. Naomi demanded entry again and was met with silence. Soto had printed the cash log and slipped it under his vest. Beck laughed with Holt by the vending machine. "Easy morning, huh? Man got mouthy. We shut it." Holt's face was pale. "He wasn't fighting, Harlan. You know that." Beck's grin faded. "We play the game. We stick to the rules." That night, Sunny sat in her apartment, surrounded by negatives and tape, the walls covered with pinned photographs and red thread. At the center was a Polaroid of Lila smiling beside a port container. Sunny whispered, "Your story isn't over yet." She pieced together the blue bet ledger. More than $1 million in wagers across dozens of officers, spanning several years. Every entry tied to a victim's name and race. This was not just corruption. It was a sport. Soto transferred the unedited footage to an encrypted drive. The video showed the stop, The false command, the pressure on Damien's neck, the timer marking the length of the incident. He stared at it, jaw tight, then typed a message. "We need to talk." Early the next morning, the envelope from Sonny arrived at Damien's post office box. Inside the cell, Damien opened his eyes to sunlight slicing through the bars. He knew someone had handed him the first crack in the armor. "You made a bet, Beck," he whispered, "but I've spent my life prosecuting gamblers." The city kept moving outside. No one knew yet that the evidence that would bring down the precinct had already been rescued by a woman who refused to let the truth die in the dark. Sunlight poured through the tall windows of the courtroom. Every seat was taken. Reporters, clerks, off-duty officers, curious citizens who had read the morning headline. No one knew yet that this was the beginning of a reckoning. Damien Cross sat at the defense table, wrists stiff from the cuffs, suit wrinkled but posture straight. Across the aisle sat Sergeant Harlan Beck, smug behind his uniform. Officer Lena Holt sat one chair behind him, jaw clenched, eyes darting anywhere but toward Damien. Judge Margaret Quinn entered, gray hair tied neatly, glasses perched on her nose. She had seen hundreds of cases, but this one felt different before it even began. The clerk read the case, State versus Damien Cross. The prosecutor stood, voice flat and practiced. "The state charges Mr. Cross with resisting arrest and assaulting a police officer. Our officers were responding to a traffic violation. The defendant became aggressive, attempted to flee, and struck Sergeant Beck in the course of lawful duty." Damien watched quietly. He had been in this position countless times, on the other side of the aisle, building cases, demanding truth. Now the system he once defended was speaking against him with the same rehearsed authority. He looked at the jury box, ordinary citizens shifting uncomfortably, sensing something was off. His public defender, Theo Lang, rose nervously. This was not the client he had expected. A federal prosecutor with a spotless record. "Your Honor," Theo began, clearing his throat, "my client maintains his innocence. There is no body cam footage confirming the officer's claim." The prosecutor cut in smoothly. "That's because the body cams malfunctioned." Theo frowned. Both officers' cameras malfunctioned at the same time. Judge Quinn's eyes flicked upward. "Do you have maintenance reports, Counselor?" The prosecutor hesitated. "Pending submission." Theo turned toward Damien. "Mr. Cross, did you resist arrest?" "No," Damien said clearly, voice steady. "I asked a question. They answered with violence." Beck could not help himself. "That's a lie!" he shouted. The judge slammed her gavel. "Sergeant, you will remain silent unless spoken to." Theo tried to press on. His phone vibrated. An unknown number. He glanced down discreetly. A text. Remember who pays your child's tuition. Watch your tone. His hand trembled as he locked the screen. Damien caught it, eyes narrowing. The system was not just corrupt. It was armed. The prosecution called its first witness, Officer Lena Holt. She approached the stand slowly, right hand raised for the oath. Her voice wavered. I was assisting Sergeant Beck on a routine stop. The driver became non-compliant when asked to exit the vehicle. Theo stood. Objection. The term driver is neutral. Mr. Cross was not wanted for any crime. Sustained, Judge Quinn said softly, watching Holt over the rim of her glasses. Officer, please rephrase. Holt swallowed hard. The driver refused to open his trunk. We perceived a threat. Was he armed? No. Did he raise his voice, make physical contact, or attempt to flee? No. Then what threat did you perceive? Her silence said enough. Beck shifted in his seat, glaring at her. Answer the question. Holt whispered. I don't know. Damien studied her face. Tension, guilt, exhaustion. Somewhere under that uniform, a conscience was cracking. The prosecutor quickly ended her testimony. No further questions. Judge Quinn took notes, her pen pausing, her brow tightening. She had been on the bench long enough to recognize when testimony bent around truth. Theo called no witnesses that morning. He knew the game. They would deny bail, drag it out, break Damien slowly. As they recessed, the judge looked down at him. Mr. Cross, I will review your release petition this afternoon. Her tone was neutral, but her eyes carried something. Maybe doubt, maybe sympathy. As the courtroom emptied, Beck passed by the defense table and leaned in close, just low enough that the deputies could not hear. You think that badge makes you untouchable? We own this city, Cross. Welcome to the other side. Damien did not flinch. You should have done your homework. You just arrested the man who audits your payroll. Beck's smirk faltered. For the first time, he saw something in Damien's eyes that was not fear. It was calculation. In the back row, Sunny Bennett adjusted her vintage camera. She had slipped into the courtroom unnoticed, press pass clipped to her collar. Every flash captured emotion. The cold precision of the prosecutor, the panic on Holt's face, the self-satisfaction dripping from Beck's grin. But the shot she cared about most was Damien, the way he sat upright even in disgrace, the quiet fire in his eyes. She clicked one last frame, just as the gavel struck for recess. The light hit him perfectly, half in sun, half in shadow. After the break, the prosecution moved to deny bail. Your Honor, Mr. Cross's position grants him access to federal resources that could compromise ongoing investigations. He's a flight risk. Theo stood, visibly angry. That's absurd. He's the highest-ranking officer of the law in this district. If he wanted to flee, he wouldn't be sitting here in cuffs. Judge Quinn tapped her pen. Has the prosecution provided any evidence of intent to flee? Not at this time, Your Honor. She paused, exhaled, then said quietly, "Bail denied." The gavel fell like a verdict. The sound echoed off marble and glass. For a moment, no one moved. Damien closed his eyes briefly, not in defeat, but in patience. He had expected this. Sometimes the only way to expose rot was from inside the walls. As officers led him away, his gaze brushed past Holt. She froze for a heartbeat. She almost said something, but the weight of her silence won again. Outside, Sonny waited on the courthouse steps, camera in hand. When Damien was escorted through the doors, she lifted the lens. The shutter clicked. The photo captured the bruises on his neck, the sunlight behind his head like a halo, and the shame on the officers' faces as they realized who they had chained. That image would soon reach every newsroom in the state. Inside the courtroom, Judge Quinn sat alone for a moment after clearing the docket. She removed her glasses, rubbed her temples, and whispered to herself, "What have we done?" By late afternoon, Naomi Reyes received a call from an unknown number. A woman's voice said softly, "He's not alone. Tell him to hold on. The truth is burning in the trash downstairs." Then the line went dead. That night, the local news aired the photo from Sonny's camera under the headline, "Federal Prosecutor Detained Without Cause." The public began to stir. Talk shows debated. Commentators speculated. But inside his cell, Damien did not watch. He sat calmly under the thin wall, waiting. Somewhere in a dark room across town, a roll of film was drying. The proof of a gambling ring that had just bet against the wrong man. The next morning, the photo of Damien Cross in handcuffs was everywhere. On phones, morning papers, every television in the city. A man who once stood for justice now sat behind bars, his neck bruised, his dignity weaponized. Across town, in a small apartment, Sonny Bennett sat on the floor, surrounded by fragments of burnt paper she had rescued from the steel bin labeled "Confidential Burn." The smell of ash still clung to the pages. She took a deep breath and began piecing them together with strips of clear tape, her fingers trembling slightly. The words began to reappear in faded blue ink. Blue bet, dozens of officers, more than $1 million total. Underneath, she saw a list. Dates, vehicle types, race, payout amounts. Then, one line made her freeze. Cross Tesla $750. Her stomach turned. It was not random. It was planned. Damien Cross was a name on a scorecard. Sunny leaned closer, tracing the handwriting with her thumb. The scrawled initials at the bottom, Beck's, were unmistakable. She had seen them before, years earlier, when her sister Lila had been investigating police misconduct before vanishing without a trace. Sunny's throat tightened. Everything connected. The same precinct, the same culture of betting, the same silence. She stood surrounded by her evidence, dozens of torn notebook pages, film rolls and Polaroids of officers drinking and passing envelopes of cash. She pinned each photo to the wall with tape until her living room looked like a crime map. In the center, she wrote 2 words in marker: the game. Then below it, dozens of players, one city betrayed. At the precinct, Sergeant Harlan Beck slammed his locker shut, his rage echoing through the corridor. "Who leaked that damn picture?" he shouted. The younger officers fell silent. Lena Holt sat at her desk, head bowed, pretending to fill out a report. Beck stalked toward her. "You froze on the stand yesterday," he hissed. "You think I didn't see it?" She did not respond. "Don't start thinking you're better than the rest of us," he snapped. "You signed up for this." Holt finally looked up, her eyes hollow. "You made me hold a man down while you laughed," she whispered. "That wasn't what I signed up for." Beck's jaw clenched, but he said nothing. He turned and stormed out, slamming the door hard enough to rattle the glass. Upstairs, Detective Julian Soto sat alone in the Internal Affairs office, staring at a corrupted video file. He bypassed the deletion lock and found the hidden data log. There it was, Damien Cross's traffic stop. The footage played normally until Beck's shout of, "Stop resisting!" And then the feed went black. Soto checked the network activity and saw the deletion request sent from Beck's terminal shortly after the arrest. He backed up the full cache and whispered, "Got you." Across town, Sunny changed into a courier uniform, cap pulled low. She carried a small brown box labeled "Legal Documents." Inside were the reconstructed pages of the Blue Bet ledger, printed photographs, and the Axon invoice showing monthly cash payments to Beck. She needed to get it into Damien Cross's hands before the next hearing. The courthouse smelled faintly of disinfectant and old coffee. Sunlight streamed through the glass atrium as she walked toward the elevators, her pulse steady but fast. Halfway down the hall, she froze. Beck was standing near the vending machine, talking on his phone. His eyes lifted and locked onto hers. Recognition flashed in an instant. "Hey!" he barked. "You! Stop right there!" Sunny turned and ran. The box thudded against her chest as she bolted down the corridor. Beck shouted for backup, his boots pounding behind her. She pushed through a side door and sprinted down the stairwell. Papers spilled, fluttering like confetti through the air. She grabbed what she could. Photographs, receipts, one key page of the ledger, and shoved them inside her jacket. She reached the parking level and ducked behind a maintenance cart. Beck burst through the door seconds later, furious, panting. "You think you're clever, huh?" he sneered, advancing. Sonny backed up slowly, then spoke, voice low but firm. "Clever enough to make sure you're in every frame." He lunged forward. Sonny shoved the cart hard into his leg and darted past him. He stumbled, cursing. As she sprinted toward the exit, a security guard appeared near the ramp. "Sergeant, what's going on?" Beck straightened instantly. "Nothing. Routine." But his face was red, his composure cracking. Outside, sunlight hit Sonny's face like salvation. She ducked behind a row of cars, breathing hard, then reached inside her jacket. Her fingers closed around the roll of 35mm film she had hidden in her inner pocket. The rest of the box might be gone, but this roll held everything. Beck taking cash from an Axon employee at a bar called the Blue Horse. That single image could burn him to the ground. That night, inside his cell, Damien sat quietly when the door opened. Theo Lang entered, looking exhausted but alert. His hands trembled slightly as he placed a manila envelope on the table. "This came for you," he said. Damien opened it carefully. Inside were photographs, receipts, and a folded note in neat handwriting. "They planned it before you left home." Damien looked up, meeting Theo's eyes. "You believe me now?" Theo nodded. "I do, and I think we can prove it." He slid another photo forward, Beck shaking hands with a man outside Axon security, a white envelope visible between them. "Who sent you this?" Damien asked. "A woman named Sunny Bennett," Theo replied. "She said to tell you she's not stopping until every one of them falls." Damien leaned back, exhaling slowly. "Then tomorrow," he said, "we bring the sun inside the courtroom." Across town, Sunny stood in her dark room, watching the photos emerge under the red glow. The faces appeared one by one. Beck at a poker table, Chief Diana Morales in the background of a precinct fundraiser, and one shot that made Sunny's blood run cold. Morales and Beck together at a shipping yard, standing beside a marked container. The same place Lila had visited before she disappeared. Sunny stared at it for a long time, then placed it on the drying line with trembling hands. By midnight, she sealed a second envelope with the developed photos and dropped it into the federal courthouse's overnight mailbox. Outside, the night was warm, the air heavy but dry. She looked up at the skyline, the city lights reflected off the water, bright and indifferent. "You're not gone, Lila," she whispered. "You left me the trail back at the precinct." Beck sat in his office, staring at a blank computer screen. Soto's encrypted message blinked unread in his inbox. Outside, the sound of police radios echoed faintly. For the first time in years, Beck felt something he had not felt in a long time. Fear. And miles away, in a cell barely large enough to stretch his legs, Damian Cross closed his eyes. He did not know what tomorrow would bring, only that sunlight was coming again, and this time it would shine on the truth. Morning light poured through the high windows of the courtroom, glinting off the polished wood and the rows of silent faces waiting for the hearing to begin. Outside, cameras lined the courthouse steps. Reporters shouted questions about Blue Bet, a phrase now sweeping through the city like a storm. Inside, Damian Cross sat at the defense table in a dark suit, posture calm but unyielding. The faint marks of restraint still showed on his throat, yet his eyes were clear, focused, ready. Theo Lang sat beside him, shuffling notes, hands steady for the first time since the arrest. The air was charged, almost electric, when the bailiff called the room to order. Even the sound of footsteps seemed to echo with anticipation. Judge Margaret Quinn entered, robe flowing, expression unreadable. She struck the gavel once. Court is now in session. The prosecutor rose immediately. Your Honor, the state intends to prove that the defendant resisted arrest, endangered officers, and attempted to conceal evidence. Damian's gaze remained fixed on the judge. Then, with quiet precision, he stood. Your Honor, he said, before we proceed, I request permission to address the court directly. The prosecutor objected. He's the defendant, not counsel. Judge Quinn hesitated, then nodded. Proceed, Mr. Cross, but keep it brief. Damian reached into his suit pocket and withdrew something that caught the light. A gold badge, gleaming under the morning sun, streaming through the tall glass windows. The courtroom gasped. He held it up calmly. This, he said, voice steady, is the federal prosecutor's badge for this district. I earned it years ago, under oath to uphold justice without fear or favor. Yesterday, the men who assaulted me wore badges of their own, but a badge means nothing when it no longer represents the truth. The prosecutor sputtered, Your Honor, this is theatrics. But Damian continued, voice rising just enough to fill the room. These officers bet on arrests. They gambled on humiliation. They turned justice into a game called Blue Bet, and I can prove it. The room fell silent. Judge Quinn leaned forward slightly. You have evidence, Mr. Cross. Theo stood. Yes, Your Honor. Dozens of pages of ledger entries recovered from the precinct, all verified by timestamp and officer signature. He lifted a folder and handed it to the clerk. Quinn opened it slowly, her eyes scanning the handwritten columns. Names, payouts, racial slurs scribbled in margins, and a single entry from the morning of the arrest. Cross, Tesla, $750. Her pen froze midair. The prosecutor stood again, trying to regain control. "Objection. These documents are unverified," Theo interrupted sharply. "They've been authenticated by Detective Julian Soto, Internal Affairs. He's here to testify." A murmur rippled through the gallery as Soto entered the courtroom, holding a drive in his hand. "Your Honor," he said, "this contains the unedited body cam footage from the arrest. It was deleted from the precinct system by Sergeant Beck's terminal shortly after the incident." He inserted the drive into the court's evidence display. The lights dimmed slightly as the screen flickered on. The jury saw Damien standing beside his Tesla, hands visible, voice calm. Then Beck's shout filled the room. "Stop resisting!" followed by the thud of impact. The image froze on Beck's knee, pressing Damien's neck. A timestamp blinked in the corner. Gasps broke out. Someone in the back whispered the length of the incident. Judge Quinn's hand trembled slightly as she removed her glasses. "Play the rest." The footage continued, Holt's voice shaky, pleading. "Harlan, stop! You're hurting him!" Then static. The screen went black. When the lights came back on, silence flooded the courtroom. Beck sat stiff, face pale, sweat beading at his temple. Holt avoided his eyes, staring down at her folded hands. Damien spoke quietly. "Your Honor, the footage is only part of it. The officers profited from these encounters. They used a private contractor, Axon Security, as a laundering front." Theo displayed a photograph. Beck accepting an envelope from a man in an Axon uniform. Another photo followed. Chief Diana Morales shaking Beck's hand at a precinct fundraiser. "The same company that supplied their body cams," Damien added, "paid them to turn those cameras off." The gallery erupted in murmurs. The judge struck her gavel. "Order! Order!" Theo turned to the witness stand. "Detective Soto, who authorized the deletions?" Soto hesitated. "I can confirm only that the order came from Beck's system, but higher commands knew the pattern. This wasn't the first time." Theo nodded grimly. "We call our next witness Officer Owen Mercer." Every head turned as Mercer entered from the back. Plain clothes, nervous but resolute. He had resigned years earlier after reporting irregularities in traffic citations. He took the stand, hands gripping the edge. "I recorded Sergeant Beck years ago bragging about Blue Bet," he said. I quote, "Luxury car, easy money. You cuff them, you cash in. That's the rule." The courtroom gasped again. Theo pressed a button, and the recording played. Beck's voice came through the speakers, boastful, mocking. Beck leapt to his feet. "That's fake, spliced audio. Judge Quinn pounded her gavel. "Sit down, Sergeant." But the damage was done. Even the prosecutor had gone pale. Damien turned to the bench. "Your Honor, this isn't just about me. It's about every name in that ledger. Hundreds of victims. Every one of them deserves to be heard." The judge looked at him for a long moment. "Mr. Cross, you're asking this court to accept evidence that implicates not only these officers, but their command." Damien nodded slowly. "Yes, Your Honor, because the truth doesn't stop at rank." The courtroom doors opened suddenly. 2 federal agents entered, flashing identification. "Your Honor," one said, "we have a federal order to seize all records related to the Blue Bet investigation." Quinn nodded gravely. "Execute your warrant." As the agents collected files and drives, Beck muttered under his breath, "This is a setup." He turned to Holt, whispering frantically, "Say something. Tell them." But Holt did not move. Tears welled in her eyes. Finally she stood. "Your Honor," she said softly, "it's true. Every word. We took bets. We turned people into numbers." The room fell silent again. Beck stared at her in disbelief. "You're finished," he hissed. She looked at him calmly. "So are you." Judge Quinn leaned back, her voice solemn. "The court will recess pending federal review. All defendants are remanded to federal custody." The gavel struck hard, echoing through the hall like a final judgment as agents escorted Beck away. He shouted over his shoulder, "You think this ends with me, Cross? You have no idea who's behind it." Damien watched him go, unflinching. "Then I guess we'll find out," he said quietly. Outside, sunlight flooded the courthouse steps as the doors opened. Reporters surged forward, microphones raised. Damien emerged slowly, the golden badge pinned to his chest, catching the morning light. He did not speak to the cameras. He simply looked out at the crowd, citizens, victims, strangers, and nodded once. The truth had begun to move. Behind him, Sonny Bennett watched from across the street, camera in hand. She lowered it after taking one final photo. Damien in sunlight, badge shining, surrounded by chaos and clarity all at once. She whispered, "You did it." But Damien's mind was already elsewhere. The case was only half over. Somewhere beyond the courthouse, shadows were shifting, and one name kept echoing in his thoughts: Lila. Her disappearance was no longer just a tragedy. It was connected. And as the sunlight glimmered across his badge, Damien Cross knew one thing with absolute certainty. The next battle had already begun. In the weeks after the trial, the city no longer looked the same. The precinct, once known for its efficiency and discipline, stood abandoned, its signboard removed, the windows boarded up. The Blue Bet scandal had detonated through every level of law enforcement like a fault line finally snapping. Sergeant Harlan Beck's name was now a national synonym for corruption. His face plastered across every news station. He had tried to disappear, faking a suicide on a fishing boat, but authorities found him alive days later in a rented cabin under a false name. He was extradited back, handcuffed in the same vessel he had humiliated others. His sentencing was swift, decades in federal prison for racketeering, assault under color of authority, and obstruction of justice. When the verdict was read, he did not look at Damien Cross. He just muttered, "It was never supposed to get this far." Damien had quietly replied, "It always gets this far when you gamble with human lives." Officer Lena Holt's story was quieter, sadder. After confessing on the stand, she was dismissed from the force. The Department of Justice spared her prison time in exchange for cooperation, but she lost custody of her son. At her hearing, she told the judge, "I wish I'd spoken sooner. Every silence was another bruise on someone else's skin." She was sent to a rehabilitation program for trauma, a broken soul trying to start again. Chief Diana Morales, who had spent her career marketing herself as the reformer the city needed, fell the hardest. Investigators traced millions from Axon Security into a personal foundation she managed through offshore accounts. Within a short time, her retirement package was revoked, and her house was seized. She disappeared from the public eye entirely, reportedly living under another name in another state. To the press, her lawyer simply said, "She's done talking." Detective Julian Soto, the man who risked his job by preserving the deleted footage, was promoted to lead the Internal Affairs Bureau. He refused interviews, saying only one sentence when a reporter caught him outside his office. "Justice doesn't need a microphone." His files helped reopen dozens of prior cases that had been quietly closed under procedural compliance. One by one, those old ghosts began to breathe again. Theo Lang, the overworked public defender who had nearly given in to fear, found redemption in the aftermath. After the case closed, he resigned from the county office and opened a small non-profit law firm offering free defense services for victims of police misconduct. On the first day, he hung a photo of Damien Cross on the wall beside the quote, "Truth is a debt that must always be paid." The most visible change came from the victims. The city approved a substantial compensation fund for the hundreds of people falsely arrested, beaten, or extorted under the Blue Bet system. For many, the money could never be enough, but the recognition mattered. The first check went to a young father whose arrest had triggered some of the earliest bets years earlier. Standing outside City Hall, he told reporters, "They thought they could make a game out of us. Now we're writing the rules." Damian Cross, though, was no longer in office to see it happen. He had resigned quietly a week after the verdict, leaving behind his corner office at the federal prosecutor's office. When a journalist asked him why, he answered simply, "Justice shouldn't belong to one office. It belongs to everyone willing to fight for it." With Sonny Bennett and Julian Soto, he co-founded the Cross Justice Institute, an independent legal center dedicated to exposing misconduct and funding reform programs across the state. The Institute's first project was a civilian audit board for police accountability. Within a short time, several major cities requested to replicate the model. For Sonny, the weeks after the trial were both triumph and grief. The investigation had made her famous overnight, but fame meant little. Every time she looked at her sister's photo, she knew the story wasn't over. The last frame from her recovered film, showing Chief Morales and Beck at the shipping yard, still haunted her. The file was turned over to federal investigators, but Damian had his doubts. Too many threads led back to federal names, and one of them might explain why Lila had vanished in the first place. On the day the case officially closed, Damian stood on the steps of the now empty courthouse. The morning sun was soft and golden, the same light that had once blinded him on the highway. Behind him, volunteers were painting over graffiti on the walls. No badge above the law. He turned as Sonny approached, holding a manila folder. "Last file from the audit," she said, handing it to him. "They think it's closed." He opened it and stared at the document inside, an old internal memo from Axon Security, dated years before the Blue Bet scandal began. At the bottom was a familiar signature, Nolan Gray, Deputy Director, FBI Liaison. Damian read quietly. Lila's case was never random. Sonny nodded. "I know. I found the last photo she took. Morales wasn't the only one there." The two stood there for a long time, sunlight warming the courthouse steps. Around them, the city kept moving. Buses, chatter, construction sounds, ordinary life returning after extraordinary pain. But beneath the calm, both knew the city hadn't healed. It had only awakened. Damian finally spoke, voice low but firm. "This isn't the end. It's the beginning of something bigger." Sonny smiled faintly. "Then let's begin again." He looked down at his hands, the faint scars still visible. The memory of those moments on the roadside that had nearly defined him. He thought of Beck in prison, of Morales hiding, of the officers who would never wear their bureau badges again. He thought of Lila, standing somewhere near the port years ago, camera in hand, whispering into the wind. Light always finds the truth. As he turned toward the street, the sun climbed higher, bright and unyielding. The city was still scarred, but the darkness had been named, and that Damien knew was where real justice always begins. The city was quiet that afternoon. A thin veil of heat shimmered over the harbor, and the sound of gulls carried across the docks. Damien Cross stood near the edge of the pier, the sun striking the back of his suit jacket as if demanding he face the light. Beside him, Sunny Bennett held a small wooden box she had found in his apartment nights earlier, carved with the words, "For Sunny, if I'm gone." She had brought it without a word, knowing it wasn't hers to open. Damien's hands were still, almost reverent, as he lifted the lid. Inside lay 9 Polaroid photos, neatly stacked, their edges frayed by time. The first few showed the same container yard where Lila had vanished years earlier, numbers painted on rusted steel. In the background of one photo, sunlight glinted off a badge, an FBI badge, half visible on the jacket of a man whose face was turned away. Sunny watched quietly as Damien spread the photos across the hood of his car. "These were hers," he said softly. "Lila sent them to me before she disappeared. I thought they were just from her last assignment, but she was trying to tell me something." He picked up the final photo. Beck, Morales, and that same man in the suit, all standing beside the container. She found them. She must have known what was inside. Sunny nodded. She was following the money trail, not realizing it led straight into federal hands. The wind picked up, flipping one of the Polaroids over. On the back, Lila's handwriting read, "Don't trust Morales. They're not who they say they are." For a long moment, neither spoke. The sound of the waves filled the silence. The same rhythm Lila used to say reminded her of time, how it erased everything eventually, except truth. Damien looked out at the water, his reflection glimmering over the waves. "She always said light was a witness," he murmured, "even when people look away." He took a deep breath, his voice lowering. "Now it's my turn to finish what she started." Sunny handed him a small envelope. "I developed the last roll of film she left in the camera." Inside were 4 new photos, grainy but unmistakable. The first showed a dock worker loading boxes with Axon security logos. The second, a man in a dark suit bearing a lanyard that read, "Federal Liaison, Gray." Damien froze. "Nolan Gray," he whispered. "The same name from the Axon memo." Sunny nodded. "He's not gone. He's in Washington now, working under the Bureau's Special Oversight Branch." She hesitated before adding, "The Department of Justice closed the case this morning. Officially, Lila's death is listed as unresolved." Damien's jaw tightened. Unresolved means buried. He looked up toward the sun, squinting slightly. Then we'll dig. They stood there for a while, letting the heat settle around them. The port hummed with the dull machinery of commerce, trucks reversing, cranes moving, people unaware that beneath those ordinary motions lay an empire of secrets. Sunny reached into her bag and pulled out one more item, a sealed roll of undeveloped film. "This was hidden inside the box," she said. "I didn't want to open it without you." Damien took it carefully, weighing it in his palm like evidence from a crime that refused to die. "Do you want to know what's on it?" she asked. He shook his head slowly. "Not yet. Some truth needs a witness." He stepped toward a steel barrel set near the dock, filled with ash and old papers. From his coat pocket, he drew the same lighter he had carried since his Marine days. He struck the flint once. The flame caught instantly, a thin, trembling line of orange. Sunny's eyes widened. "You're burning it?" Damien looked at her calmly. Lila risked everything to expose this, but she also knew some things shouldn't survive in the wrong hands. This film could destroy lives. People who still need to come forward will find them another way. He tossed the roll into the fire. The plastic cracked. The flame flared, and a thin column of smoke rose into the bright sky. For a moment, neither moved. The smoke curled upward, a dark thread unraveling into sunlight. Damien watched it fade, then whispered, "That's how she said goodbye. Quiet, without applause." Sunny turned to him, eyes wet but steady. "And what about you?" she asked. "What do you say goodbye to?" He smiled faintly. "To silence." They left the dock together, walking toward the end of the pier where the sea breeze carried the scent of and fuel. Sunny stopped and looked back. "Do you ever wonder," she said softly, "what she'd think if she saw all this?" Damien nodded. "She'd tell us the fight's not over." He looked at the horizon, bright, endless, almost too white to stare into. "And she'd tell me to keep the Institute going." Later that evening, back at the Cross Justice Institute, sunlight poured through the large front windows as volunteers packed boxes of files. On the wall hung a framed photo of Lila, camera in hand, smiling. Below it, a plaque read, "Truth is the only light that doesn't fade." Damien watched as a young intern carefully mounted a second frame beside it, one of the photos Sunny had taken at the courthouse. Damien stepping out into daylight, the golden badge gleaming on his chest. He turned toward the open window, the smell of the sea still clinging to his clothes. The city stretched below, honest, raw, imperfect, but awake. The same streets that once humiliated him now carried protest banners, murals, and quiet determination. Sunny appeared in the doorway holding 2 cups of coffee. "The board wants to name a scholarship after her," she said. "For investigative journalists." Damien smiled. Good. Let them call it the Lila Grant Fund, for those who chase truth, even when it burns. As the sun began to dip, its reflection gleamed off the courthouse dome in the distance. Damien looked out one last time, his voice barely above a whisper. She wanted justice to be more than punishment. She wanted it to mean change. Sonny placed a hand on his shoulder. Then we'll make sure it does. They stood together in the soft gold of late afternoon, the city alive below, the Institute buzzing behind them, the weight of everything that had been lost giving way to something fragile but real. For the first time in a long while, Damien felt peace. Not victory, not closure, but peace. Far across the water, the last wisp of smoke from the burned film rose into the sunlit sky and disappeared. And as it vanished, so did the shadow that had followed him since that morning on the highway. Justice at last had found its light. If this story moved you, share it with someone who still believes in justice. Every story shared keeps the truth alive.